Welcome to the True Crime Family Channel. Today we dive into the terrifying case of Linda Reynolds, a housewife who had to become a drugs dealer to make sure she and her children could survive March 3rd. Synopsis 2010, a quiet suburban street in Dayton, Ohio, is about to become the center of a gruesome crime scene. A seemingly ordinary housewife, once known for her devotion to her children and her job at the local grocery store, is now the focal point of an investigation that will unravel a shocking tale of drugs, deception, and murder. Little did anyone know behind her calm exterior was the leader of a neighborhood drug operation, a woman who orchestrated her rise to power in the most unexpected ways, but now tragedy strikes and the consequences of her actions will send shockwaves through the town. Dayton, Ohio, 2008, Linda Reynolds had always been a simple woman, content with her life as a mother and a wife. Her husband, Tom, had Linda Reynolds been her rock, working long hours as a mechanic to provide for the family. But everything changed one cold January night when Tom was shot dead in a robbery gone wrong. The police said it was a random act of violence, but Linda knew better. She had overheard bits of conversations between Tom and some shady characters he had been dealing with. Tom had gotten involved with the wrong people, trying to make extra money to clear some debts when Tom died. Linda was left alone with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and two teenage boys who still needed to be fed, clothed, and cared for. She tried to make meet with her job at the grocery store, but the money just wasn't enough. The creditors began calling, and the fear of losing her home became real one night. After putting the boys to bed, Linda sat at the kitchen table staring at the pile of bills in front of her. She felt hopeless and scared. Then she remembered the small stash of marijuana Tom had hidden in the garage. He had kept it there for some extra cash on the side, selling a bit to friends. Desperate, Linda decided to follow in his footsteps. At first, it was just small sales to a few trusted neighbors who knew her situation and wanted to help. They were people she had known for years, and they didn't judge her. But as the weeks went by, word spread that Linda had some good stuff, and more people started coming to her. She didn't know much about drugs, but she learned quickly. She kept the marijuana in an old tin box hidden behind a loose brick in the garage. And she made sure the boys never knew what she was doing. But keeping it a secret became harder as the business grew. Soon she was making enough money to cover the bills, but she wasn't satisfied. She wanted more, and she knew she could get it. Linda began to make connections with local suppliers, men who were willing to sell to her in bulk. She bought more and more, turning her home into a hub for drug distribution. It was risky, but the money was good, and she couldn't stop. Linda's Kyle Reynolds, sons Mike, and were smart boys, but they were also curious. They started asking questions, and before long, they figured out what their mother was doing. Instead of being angry, they offered to help. Linda was hesitant at first, but she knew they needed the money. So she agreed. Mike and Kyle became her runners, delivering marijuana to clients all over town. They were careful, following their mother's strict rules to avoid getting caught. By the end of that year, Linda was no longer the scared, desperate woman she had been when Tom died. She was in control, running a successful drug operation from her own home. The fear of losing everything had turned her into someone she never thought she'd become, a woman willing to do whatever it took to survive. Connections. By 2009, Linda had become more than just a small-time dealer. She was smart and knew how to play the game. She started making deals with important people in Dayton. One of her first big connections was with a city councilman. He was a man who liked to keep his hands clean in public, but behind closed doors he had a taste for the drugs. Linda supplied, he paid her well, and promised to keep the police off her back as long as she kept him happy. Next, Linda started working with a local businessman who owned several construction companies. He had a lot of money but was always looking for ways to make more. Linda offered him a deal. He would help her launder her drug money through his businesses, and in return she would supply him with drugs at a discount. It was a win-win, and it made Linda's operation even stronger. But perhaps her most important Officer Daniels connection was with Officer Daniels. He was known in the community as a good cop, always helping out where he could. But Linda knew his secret. Officer Daniels had a dark side, and he liked to indulge in the very drugs he was supposed to keep off the streets. Linda started supplying him, and in return, Daniels made sure to keep her out of trouble. He even tipped her off when other dealers were getting too close, allowing her to stay one step ahead with these powerful people in her pocket. Linda's business flourished. She moved out of the small, risky deals and into bigger ones. She started selling more than just marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, anything that would make her more money. Her name began to spread in the local underworld. People started calling her the Queen of Dayton, a name that made her both feared and respected as her empire grew. Linda became more careful. She stopped using her sons, Mike and Kyle, for drug runs. She couldn't bear the thought of something happening to them. Now that her business was getting more dangerous, she hired other people to do the dirty work, people who knew how to keep quiet and follow orders. Mike and Kyle didn't like it at first. They had gotten used to the thrill of the runs. But Linda was firm. She wanted them safe out of harm's way. They were all she had left, but not everyone was happy about Linda's rise to power. The West Side Kings, a notorious gang in West Side Kings. Dayton started to take notice. They had been running the drug scene in the city for years, and they didn't like the idea of a woman taking over their territory. At first, they tried to scare Linda, sending her threats and warning her to back off. But Linda wasn't the type to scare easily. In January 2010. The tension, Linda versus West Side Kings, between Linda and the West Side Kings boiled over. They began moving into her territory, trying to push her out by force. There were violent confrontations, with her dealers getting jumped and threatened on the streets. But Linda was determined to hold her ground. She doubled down, increasing her security and making sure her boys stayed far away from the action. Then in late February, a turning point, 2010, something happened that changed everything. A key member of the West Side Kings was found dead, shot in the back of the head, and left in an alley. The gang was furious and blamed Linda. Even though there was no proof she was involved, they knew she had the connections and the power to pull off something like this. And they wanted revenge. This murder marked a turning point. The West Side Kings were out for blood, and Linda knew it. The city that had once been her playground was now a war zone, and she was right in the middle of it. Linda tried to keep her operation running, but the constant threats and violence made it impossible to keep everyone safe. She had worked so hard to build her empire, but now it was all at risk of falling apart as the tension grew. Linda couldn't help but feel the weight of what she had done. She had started this business to protect her family, to keep her son safe and secure. But now that very business was threatening to destroy everything she loved. The rise to power that had once filled her with pride now felt like a curse. And she knew that sooner or later, something terrible was going to happen. March 1st, 2010. 2010 started like any other day. Linda's boys, Mike and Kyle, were supposed to stay out of the business, but on that day they decided to help their mother with a delivery. It was supposed to be a simple run, just a quick drop-off on the west side of Dayton. They didn't tell Linda because they knew she wouldn't approve. But the West Side Kings had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Mike and Kyle walked down a quiet street, they were ambushed. The gang had planned it perfectly. 3 cars pulled up, blocking their path before the boys could react. They were grabbed, dragged into one of the cars, and driven away. The attack was fast and brutal. Mike and Kyle tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered. They were tied up, blindfolded, and taken to a dark, cold basement where they were beaten and tortured. The gang wanted information, but more than that, they wanted revenge that evening. Linda was at home thinking about her boys and how much she loved them. Then the phone rang. When she answered, she heard a voice she didn't recognize. The man on the other end was cold and calm. He told her that Mike and Kyle were in their custody and that if she wanted to see them alive again, she would have to give up her territory and all her drug connections. Linda tried to stay calm, but her hands were shaking. She knew this was the moment everything could fall apart. She tried to negotiate, offering money, offering anything, but the man wasn't interested. He gave her 48 hours to decide, then hung up, leaving Linda in a state of panic on March 3rd, 2010. March 3rd, 2010. Linda's world shattered that morning. A large box was delivered to her doorstep. It looked like any other package, but when she opened it, she felt her heart stop. Inside the box were the severed heads of her sons, Mike and Kyle. Their eyes were open, staring blankly into nothing. There was no sound, no scream, just silence as Linda stared at the nightmare in front of her. A note was tucked inside the box with just 4 words: "You made your choice." It was signed with the symbol of the West Side Kings. Linda felt the ground beneath her give way, her mind spinning in horror and rage. The boys who were her world, her reason for everything were gone, and in the most brutal way imaginable. But Linda wasn't the type to collapse under pressure that night. She set her grief aside and made a plan. She gathered the few loyal men she had left and ordered them to strike back using information she had gathered over the years. Linda targeted four of the West Side King's main drug bases. Her men broke in under the cover of darkness. Setting each building on fire, the flames destroyed everything. Drugs, money, and anyone who was inside the fires lit up the night sky, a message to the gang that Linda wasn't finished yet. On March 6, 2010, an anonymous tip was made to the Dayton Police Department. They were told about a woman who had been running a massive drug operation and whose sons had been brutally murdered. The police, already aware of the fires that had swept through the city, knew something big was happening. They arrived at Linda's house that morning ready for anything. What they found shocked even the most hardened officers. Linda was sitting in her living room, the box with her son's severed heads beside her. She was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but she wasn't hysterical. She was quiet, calm in a way that scared the officers. She handed the box over to them without saying a word, her hands steady despite the terror. She had faced the discovery of the head sent shockwaves through Dayton. The police launched a full-scale investigation digging into Linda's life, her connections and her business over the next few days. They uncovered the truth, how Linda, a seemingly ordinary housewife, had built one of the largest drug operations in the city on March 8, 2010. Questioning, she tried to keep quiet at first, but the weight of what had happened to her sons broke her down. She confessed, telling the police everything from the first time she sold marijuana to the deals she made with powerful people. The police were stunned. Linda wasn't just a dealer, she was a mastermind, someone who had controlled a huge part of the city's drug trade. But now with her sons gone, Linda didn't care about any of it. All she wanted was revenge, and she had taken it in the only way she knew how, by burning down the empire that had taken everything from her. As Linda was driven to the police station, the news spread like wildfire. The whole city was in shock. How could this quiet, unassuming housewife be the mastermind behind one of the largest drug operations in Dayton? And how could she have kept it all hidden for so long? People who had known her for years couldn't believe it. But the evidence was there, clear as day: phone records, surveillance footage. Everything pointed to her. When Linda's high-profile clients were exposed, it shook the city even more. The city councilman, the businessman, the police officer, people who were supposed to uphold the law and serve the community, had been in her pocket. The whole time arrests were made, careers were destroyed, and the trust of the people in their leaders was shattered. Linda's arrest had started a chain reaction that would take down some of Dayton's most powerful figures. September 1st, 2010, the courtroom. September 1st, 2010 was packed on the first day of Linda Reynolds' trial. Reporters from all over the state came to cover the story, and every seat was filled with people eager to see the woman who had led such a double life. Linda sat at the defense table, her face calm, almost expressionless. She showed no sign of fear or regret, even as the prosecution laid out the mountain of evidence against her. The prosecutor presented witness after witness, each one telling the same story. Linda was the brains behind the operation, the one who called the shots, the one who made the deals. They described how she had built her empire step by step, always staying one step ahead of the law. They talked about her connections with the councilman, the businessman, and the cop, and how she had used those connections to grow her business and protect herself from being caught. But the most damning evidence came from Linda's own records. The police had found notebooks hidden in her house, filled with detailed notes about every transaction, every bribe, every deal she had made. The notes were meticulous, written in neat, careful handwriting. They showed a woman who was not only smart, but also cold and calculating, a woman who had been willing to do anything to keep her business running, even if it meant risking her sons' lives. Linda's defense team tried to paint a different picture. They argued that she had been forced into the drug trade by her circumstances, that she had only done it to provide for her family after her husband died. They tried to make the jury see her as a mother who had been pushed too far, who had made bad choices out of desperation, but the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too strong, the crimes too serious. On December 15th, 2010, the verdict, December 15th, 2010, came in guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Linda to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Linda finally showed emotion. Tears filled her eyes not for herself, but for her boys, whose lives had been cut short because of her decisions. She had tried to protect them, to give them a better life. But in the end, she had failed. The trial also brought down the people who had been in business with Linda. The city councilman, once a respected leader, resigned in disgrace. The businessman was charged with money laundering and faced years in prison. Officer Daniels, the cop who had protected Linda for so long, was dismissed from the force. The city of Dayton would never be the same. Its trust in its leaders forever broken. Linda was taken away to serve her sentence, leaving behind a city in shock and a family destroyed as she sat in her cell. She thought about her boys, about all the things she would never get to see. Them do graduate, get married, have children of their own. She had built an empire, but it had cost her everything. Now all she had left were memories and regrets. The tragic tale of Linda Reynolds serves as a grim reminder of how desperation can lead even the most unlikely individuals down a dark path as the streets of Dayton slowly return to normal. The memory of the severed heads delivered to Linda's doorstep lingers in the minds of the community, a haunting symbol of the price paid for power and greed. Was Linda's descent into the drug world a choice born of necessity, or was it driven by something darker? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to stay tuned for more shocking crime stories